They stepped from the mountain mist, towering figures with voices that shook the silence of the pines. When the eldest said, "We haven't bred in years," it left only one question: had the cowboy stumbled into danger, or into a destiny no man had ever faced before? The wind carried a chill that didn't belong to spring. It whispered through the crags of the Ashthorn Range, a spine of jagged mountains that locals spoke of in hushed tones, warning drifters and greenhorns alike to steer clear. Most maps left the place blank, as if the cartographers themselves wanted no part in marking it. Silas Crowe tugged his duster tighter around his shoulders as his horse clopped along the narrow trail. A man who'd long since chosen the company of silence over the noise of towns. Silas wore solitude, the way others wore Sunday clothes, comfortable and familiar. He was tall, sharp-eyed, with a face hardened by years of wind, dust, and regret. People said he'd once ridden with posses and fought in border skirmishes, but now he rode for no one but himself. By the time the sun slipped behind the peaks, the trail had become little more than a game of guesswork. The silence was wrong, too complete. No coyotes yipped, no owls hooted. Even the trees stood oddly bent, as though bowing to something unseen. That was when Silas noticed the first sign. A footprint. Not the kind left by boot leather, nor by deer, elk, or bear. This impression was wide as a wagon wheel, sunk deep into the earth, as though pressed down by something impossibly heavy. He dismounted, crouched, and ran a calloused hand across it. The edges were fresh. "Lord above," he muttered, his voice raspy from days without use. His horse shied, ears twitching nervously. Silas steadied the reins and pressed on, though unease gnawed at him with each step. Soon he found another mark, then another, until the trail itself looked as though a parade of giants had marched through. Trees lay splintered, their trunks cracked as if by careless hands too strong for their own good. Night forced him to seek shelter. He stumbled into a clearing, where an old fire pit smoldered faintly, as if someone or something had sat here only hours ago. The air carried the faint aroma of roasted meat, though the logs were charred black and cold. Silas unsaddled his horse and crouched by the ashes, feeling the weight of being watched. The mountains loomed tall, their shadows stretching like claws across the ground. His revolver rested easy at his hip, the comfort of cold steel reassuring but pitifully small against the unease wrapping him tight. Then came the sound, heavy, deliberate, like trees groaning under a burden. Branches snapped. The earth trembled underfoot. He stood, hand hovering near his holster, eyes locked on the tree line. A shadow rose against the moonlight, taller than any man, broader than any bear. Another followed, then a third. Silhouettes shaped like women, yet impossibly large, their heads brushing low branches, hair flowing wild as banners in the wind. Silas's pulse hammered. His horse screamed and bolted to the far side of the clearing. One of the figures spoke, her voice rolling like thunder across stone. "You are small." Silas Crowe, who had faced down gunmen and rustlers without flinching, felt the first true edge of fear in years. And still, he could not look away. Before we go further, what would you have done if you were in Silas's boots? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. The clearing was swallowed by silence, save for the pounding of Silas Crowe's own heartbeat. His hand hovered near the grip of his Colt, though even he knew the weapon looked laughably small against what towered before him. 3 women stepped into the moonlight, each one enormous beyond reason. Their feet sank deep into the soil, leaving fresh craters with every move. The tallest of them, her hair as black as a raven's wing, braided down her back like a coiled rope, gazed down at Silas with eyes the color of iron. Her face bore the wear of hardship, a scar slashing across her cheek, but her presence was more terrible than any outlaw he had ever met. Beside her stood another, broader, with shoulders as wide as an ox yoke. She carried what might once have been a tree trunk, stripped and smoothed into a club. Muscles rippled along her arms like cables, and when she shifted her weight, the ground itself seemed to grumble. The third was younger, her features less weathered, though no less intimidating. Her hair fell loose, golden in the moonlight, and though she stood just as tall as the others, her expression held more curiosity than menace. She tilted her head at Silas, as though studying some strange insect that had wandered into their domain. "Small," the raven-haired one repeated, her voice low, rumbling like distant thunder, "but armed." Silas finally found his words, though they came out rough and hoarse. "Best you keep your distance. Ain't lookin' for trouble." The golden-haired one crouched, lowering herself so her massive face was level with him. The sheer size of her made his knees lock. She sniffed, her breath warm as a forge wind. "He smells of horse, of powder, of hunger." The broad one chuckled, the sound deep enough to rattle branches. "He won't last a night in these peaks. Too fragile." Silas took a step back, his boots crunching the soil. "I'll last as long as I need." His hand twitched near the Colt, though he knew damn well it wouldn't change the odds. The raven-haired leader leaned down, her shadow swallowing him whole. "We haven't bred in years," she said, voice tinged with bitterness. "Men fear us, run from us, hide their villages when we come." Silas stiffened, unsure if he'd heard her right. The golden-haired one's gaze softened. "Perhaps he is not like the others." The broad one snarled. "Or perhaps he's a spy. The lowlanders would pay well to know we still exist." Silas's mind reeled. The legends whispered in saloons, the tall women of Ashthorn, said to be nothing more than ghost tales told over whiskey, were standing in flesh before him. And they were not the bloodthirsty monsters of rumor, but something far stranger, a people, broken and cut off from the world. Yet every instinct told him he was still prey. The raven-haired one's eyes narrowed. "We will see what kind of man you are." The three giants closed in around him, their shadows swallowing the clearing. The giants herded Silas deeper into the trees, their strides long and thunderous. He had no choice but to follow. One kick of those massive legs could have broken him clean in half. His revolver felt like a toy against the sheer enormity of what surrounded him. The path twisted upward until they came to a plateau hidden between cliffs. There, a camp lay scattered across the stone. Crude shelters of pine trunks lashed together with rawhide, fire pits ringed in boulders, and drying racks heavy with strips of venison. Smoke curled into the night sky, carrying the scent of wild herbs and charred meat. It was not the camp of savages, as some old trail stories might have painted, but of people fighting to endure. Still, everything bore the mark of decline. Nets lay torn, weapons dulled with rust, and only 3 towering figures moved among the shadows. "This is what remains," the raven-haired leader said, gesturing with one vast hand. "Once, the Ashthorn clan filled these mountains. Now, only we." Silas swallowed hard, his throat dry as the desert. What happened to the rest? The broad one dropped her club into the dirt with a thud that rattled his ribs. Starved, hunted, or left to seek new land, none returned. The golden-haired sister Mira, he heard the others call her, poked at the embers of a fire and crouched low. Her eyes lingered on him with curiosity rather than scorn. "The world does not want us," she said softly. "We frighten the small folk. They burn our stores, poison our streams, shoot from the ridges. They want the Ashthorn gone." Silas took in the ragged shelters, the half-empty racks, the hollow look in their eyes. These were no monsters, they were survivors. A dying people clinging to rocks at the edge of nowhere. The raven-haired one approached, her scar catching the firelight. "You will not leave. Not yet. We must know if you are enemy or answer." Silas stiffened. "Answer to what?" Her gaze was flint. "To whether our clan dies with us." He looked around at the desolation, at Mira watching him as though weighing his soul. He thought of the prints in the mud, the broken trees, the silence of the woods. Now he understood. It was not that these women were predators. It was that the land itself could not hold them. "I'm no savior," Silas said finally, his voice low. "Just a man who wandered too far." The broad one scoffed, but the raven-haired leader's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Then we will see what sort of man you are." They offered him a seat near the fire, though it felt less like an invitation and more like a test. The flames painted their colossal faces in shades of amber and shadow. Silas sat slowly, every instinct screaming to flee. But something in Mira's eyes held him there. Something desperate, fragile, and human beneath all the might. The Ashthorn clan was dying. And now, somehow, they had tied their fate to his. Morning light spilled across the plateau, painting the peaks in a harsh gold. Silas Crowe woke stiff and cold, the fire's coals long since burned to ash. His horse was gone, fled into the dark, and all that remained was his saddle and gear, piled neatly near the shelters. He reckoned the giants could have crushed both horse and rider in their sleep if they'd wanted. That they hadn't was proof enough they wanted something else. The raven-haired leader, whom the others called Ilvara, loomed over him. In the daylight, her features were clearer. High cheekbones, skin toughened by wind and years, and eyes sharp as chipped steel. "Small man," she rumbled, "if you wish to walk from Ashthorn alive, you will prove your worth." Silas rose slowly, his hand brushing the colt at his hip. "I've proven my worth plenty in my time. Men bled to say so." The broad one, Brynja, snorted, hefting her tree-sized club. "Then bleed again, little crow." Mira, the youngest, placed a hand on her sister's arm, not with weapons, with work. And so they set him to tasks fit for men thrice his size. First came the timber. A cedar, felled by a storm, lay across the camp. Ilvara pointed to it with a finger thicker than Silas's wrist. "Cut it, drag it, stack it." They handed him an axe so large he could barely lift it. Sweat poured as he swung again and again, chips flying like hail. His shoulders screamed, his palms tore raw, yet he worked until his vision blurred. By the time he split enough for a fire, Mira's lips curved in the faintest smile. Next came the water. They gave him a clay jar big enough to hold 10 gallons, its rim rising nearly to his chest. "Fill it from the stream below," Brynja ordered. He staggered under the weight, knees buckling, but he gritted his teeth and hauled it, step by brutal step, back up the slope. Twice he slipped, nearly crushed beneath the jar, but each time he forced himself upright, sweat and grit stinging his eyes. By dusk, his hands were blistered, his back knotted tight, and his breath rasped like he'd ridden 100 miles. Yet he did not quit. The sisters watched him in silence. Ilvara's scarred face betrayed nothing, but Mira's eyes softened. Brynja crossed her arms and grunted. "Perhaps not as fragile as I thought." Silas dropped onto the dirt, arms trembling. "I ain't here to be your mule. I came because the trail carried me, but if you think you'll break me, you'll need more than chores." For the first time, Ilvara laughed. It was a sound like rolling thunder, deep and weary, but alive. "Then perhaps you are not enemy." The fire was lit again, crackling against the cold. Silas sat among them, smaller than a child at their knees, but for the first time he felt less like prey and more like a man at the edge of something vast. Yet that night, as the flames dwindled, a howl rose from the cliffs, a sound not of wolf nor bear, but of men. The sisters stiffened, eyes darting to the dark. Silas's hand drifted to his colt. Trouble was near, and not of their making. The howl echoed again, closer this time, carried on the thin mountain air. Silas Crowe rose from the fire, his hand resting on the butt of his colt. Ilvara's jaw tightened. Brynja hefted her club, and Mira's gaze darted to the cliffs above. These were not the sounds of beasts, they were the calls of men. The Ashthorn clan moved quickly. Fires were smothered, shadows reclaimed the camp, and the giants crouched low despite their size. Silas, caught in their rhythm, felt the familiar coil of danger tighten in his gut. He had been hunted before by bounty men, rustlers, and soldiers, but never with giants at his side. From the ridge above, the flicker of lanterns winked in the dark. Voices drifted down, hard and mocking. "You sure you saw him, Pike?" one man whispered. A deeper voice answered, full of command. "I know what I saw. Big as houses, moving through the trees. Think what the showman in Denver would pay for a catch like that." Silas's jaw tightened. Jonas Pike, a rustler turned raider, known in 3 territories for cruelty and a taste for spectacle. Silas had crossed paths with him once, years ago, when Pike had tried to ransom a rancher's daughter to the highest bidder. Men like him thrived on greed and fear. The voices drew closer, boots sliding on gravel. Silas crept to the edge of the plateau, belly low, peering down. He counted 7 men, all armed rifles, pistols, even a stick of dynamite slung over one man's shoulder. They moved with the hunger of wolves, eyes fixed on the hidden camp above. "Reckon we net 'em, then drag 'em down the slope," one said with a laugh. "Chain their feet, break their will, we'll be rich men." Silas's stomach turned. He glanced back at the sisters. Ilvara's expression was stone. Brynja's nostrils flared, and Mira's hands balled into fists. They had heard every word. He hissed low, just enough for them to hear. "You've got a choice, run deeper into the mountains or stand and fight." Ilvara's reply was cold and certain. "We do not run." Brynja grinned, baring teeth. "Let them come, their bones will crack the same as any." But Mira's eyes found Silas. "They are many. Guns bite deeper than teeth. You cannot match them." Silas checked the chambers of his Colt, the metallic click sharp in the night. "Lady, I've faced worse odds with less." The raiders began their climb, ropes scratching stone as they scaled toward the plateau. Pike's voice rose, sharp and eager. "Remember, don't kill 'em. Wound if you must, but I want 'em breathing." Silas exhaled slowly, steadying his nerves. 7 men, maybe more, rifles against 1 Colt and 3 giants worn thin by hunger. But he knew one thing: if Jonas Pike got his hands on the Ashthorn women, they'd suffer a fate worse than death. The outlaw had no idea what kind of fight he was walking into. The raiders' lanterns bobbed like fireflies on the cliff face, their ropes scraping rock as they hauled themselves upward. Silas Crowe knew the mountain would hand them the high ground if he didn't act fast. He turned to the sisters, his voice low but firm. "You can break a man in half with your bare hands, I've no doubt," he whispered. "But these bastards carry rifles and powder. If you rush in blind, they'll cut you down before you swing once. You want to live? You'll fight smart." Ilvara's iron-colored eyes narrowed. "And you know how to fight smart, small one?" Silas nodded, lived long enough to learn. He crouched by the fire pit and sketched rough lines in the ash with his finger. "We use the rocks, force 'em into a bottleneck here at the trailhead. You two," he gestured to Ilvara and Brynja, "hit them hard where they can't spread out." Mira, the golden-haired giantess, tilted her head, curious. "You stay back. Hurl boulders down once they're trapped. Keep 'em off balance." Brynja barked a laugh, deep and booming. The little crow gives orders. But Mira studied the plan carefully, her expression sharpening. "He is right. If we strike wild, we die. If we strike with cunning, we live." Ilvara gave a slow nod. "So be it." They moved quickly. Brynja lifted stones the size of barrels, lining the trail. Mira rolled smaller boulders into position on a ridge above. Ilvara, grim and silent, readied her tree trunk club. Silas checked his Colt. 5 rounds left. 1 chamber empty. It would have to do. The night grew tense, the only sound the scrape of raider boots on stone. Pike's voice rose, gruff and mocking. "Easy, boys, they ain't ghosts. They're flesh, and tonight they're ours." Silas crouched low at the choke point, revolver steady in his hand. His heartbeat slowed, every nerve honed sharp. He'd fought alongside posses, he'd outshot bounty hunters, but never had he fought with giants at his back. The first outlaw crested the ridge, lantern light flaring across his face. His grin froze when he spotted Silas, small and alone on the trail. "Hell," the man muttered, lifting his rifle. Silas fired first. The Colt barked, flame lighting the rocks, and the raider tumbled backward into the dark. Chaos erupted. "Now!" Silas roared. Brinja swung her club, catching two men mid-climb. Their bones cracked like dry sticks as their bodies crashed against the cliff. Ilvara stormed forward, striking down another, her roar echoing off the stone walls. Mira hurled her first boulder, the rock smashing into the ledge and scattering Pike's men like startled ants. Pike himself ducked behind a boulder, cursing. "Damn fools! They've got a man with them!" Silas squeezed off another shot, the Colt bucking in his hand, while above him, Mira's golden hair whipped in the moonlight as she hurled stone after stone. The raiders had come hunting trophies. Instead, they'd found a cowboy and 3 giants waiting in the dark. And the fight for the Ashthorn Range had only begun. Gunfire split the night like lightning. Sparks rained as bullets smacked stone, ricocheting wild across the plateau. Silas Crowe dove behind a boulder, the Colt's cylinder hot against his palm. He counted 2 rounds left. Pike's men had numbers and lead, but the Ashthorn clan had fury. Brinja charged first, her massive form blotting out the moon. She swung her club in an arc so wide it howled through the air, smashing into 3 raiders scrambling up the slope. The crack of breaking bones echoed down the cliff, their rifles tumbling useless into the dark. "Push 'em back!" Silas shouted, firing at a shadow with a rifle muzzle flashing. The outlaw pitched forward, his scream cut short as Yilvara's hand closed around his throat. She lifted him, as one might pluck a weed, then hurled him into the rocks below. From above, Mira rained destruction. Stones crashed like cannon fire, scattering Pike's men into confusion. Her golden hair gleamed with sweat and ash, her face fierce, yet her eyes darted often to Silas. Every time he shifted position, she tracked him, guarding his flanks with her aim. Still, Pike himself moved like a wolf among sheep. Lean, with a scar splitting his jawline, he carried a repeating rifle and fired with the cool precision of a man who'd killed often. One bullet grazed Brinja's arm, splattering crimson across her pale skin. She roared, stumbling back, and the sight of her blood stoked the raiders' courage. "They bleed!" Pike howled. "Bring 'em down, boys!" More gunfire. A round slammed into Ilvara's thigh, and she staggered, dropping to one knee. The ground shook under her weight. Silas cursed, rolling to her side. "Stay low!" he hissed. She bared her teeth at him. "We do not kneel." "Maybe not," Silas growled, reloading with trembling hands. "But you sure as hell fight smarter when you're alive." Pike advanced, rifle spitting fire. Silas returned a shot, forcing him behind cover. The cowboy's ears rang, lungs burning with smoke and dust. Every nerve screamed to run, yet he stood his ground. For the first time since losing his horse, he felt part of something bigger than his own survival. Brinja, wounded but unbroken, slammed her club into the earth. The impact sent a tremor up the slope, knocking 2 raiders from their footing. Mira seized the moment, hurling her largest boulder. It struck with such force that dirt and flame erupted in a storm of grit, swallowing the outlaws in chaos. When the dust cleared, only Pike remained standing, crouched with rifle in hand, eyes burning. He spat blood and hatred at the sight of Silas. "You," Pike snarled. "I should have known Crowe would crawl out of the desert sooner or later." Silas leveled his Colt, 1 round left. "You picked the wrong mountain, Pike." The outlaw sneered. "Then let's see who it buries." The plateau reeked of powder and blood. Giants bled, men groaned, and Silas Crowe squared off against the raider who would not die easy. The true measure of man and clan was about to be tested. The night fell still, after the echoes of gunfire died, the air thick with smoke and the copper sting of blood. The plateau looked like a battlefield, splintered rocks, broken weapons, and bodies sprawled across the slope. The raiders had been beaten, their dead scattered like rag dolls. But victory had not come without cost. Brynja leaned against her club, her arm bound in a strip of cloth torn from a fallen outlaw's coat. Blood seeped through, dark, against her pale skin. Ilvara sat with her back to a boulder, her thigh wound packed with moss Mira had fetched from the stream. The giantess's face was carved in stone, her pride refusing to let pain break through. Silas Crowe knelt by the fire, reloading his Colt with slow, deliberate motions. His hands shook from exhaustion, though he'd never admit it. Each metallic click of the cylinder was a promise to himself that if Pike came back, he'd be ready. Mira crouched across from him, her golden hair damp with sweat, her hands smeared with earth and blood from tending her sisters. She studied him with eyes that gleamed in the firelight, part curiosity, part something softer. "You fought like one of us," she said, voice low, almost reverent. Silas gave a tired half-smile. "Don't know if that's a compliment or a curse." "It is both," Ylvara muttered, wincing as she shifted her leg. "The small crow has earned place at our fire." Brynja rumbled a laugh despite her wound. "Aye, small but fierce, like a hawk who thinks himself an eagle." Silas glanced between them, uneasy with the weight of their gazes. He had been called many things in his life: drifter, outlaw, gunman, but never kin. The sisters drew closer to the fire. Mira laid a bundle of herbs on the flames, and the smoke turned sharp and sweet, filling the air with a strange, heady scent. She looked at Silas, her voice carrying a solemn cadence. "Among Ashthorn, when blood is spilled together, oaths must follow, or trust dies in the dark." Ylvara's iron eyes fixed on him. "You saved us from Pike's dogs. You bound yourself to our fight, whether you wished or not. Will you speak the words?" Silas hesitated. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across their colossal faces. He thought of the road he'd left behind, dusty trails, empty saloons, nights filled only with silence. And he thought of the giants beside him, a broken people, clinging to life on a mountain the world had forgotten. Slowly, he nodded. "What words?" Mira reached into the smoke, drawing her hand across her chest. "We swear by stone, by blood, and by fire. None stand alone. All rise, or all fall." Silas stood, the Colt heavy at his side, and repeated the oath. His voice was rough, but steady. "None stand alone. All rise, or all fall." Ylvara's scarred lips curved into something almost like a smile. Brynja slammed her fist to the earth, sealing the vow. And Mira, her eyes bright in the fire's glow, whispered words meant only for him. "Then you are one of us now, Silas Crowe." The oath bound them, though none of them yet knew the darker storm gathering beyond the ridges. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Ashthorn Range. The smoke of battle still lingered, carried by a restless wind. Silas Crowe had barely closed his eyes before Mira's hand shook him awake. Her golden hair was damp with morning mist, her expression carved with worry. "Up," she whispered. "They are coming." He sat upright, Colt already in his hand. "Pike's men? Thought we scattered what was left." Mira shook her head. "Not men. Giants." The words hit harder than a bullet. Silas rose, his gaze following hers toward the ridge. There, across the haze, shadows loomed, massive figures moving with dreadful certainty. Larger than Ylvara, broader than Brynja, their silhouettes carried weapons made of jagged stone and iron. Ylvara, leaning on her club despite her wounded leg, spat into the dirt. "The Vailun," she growled. "Carrion kin. They preyed on our weakness for years. Now they smell blood." Brynja's face twisted with fury. "Let them come. We'll crush their skulls." Silas's gut churned. "How many?" Mira's eyes narrowed, scanning the figures. "At least a dozen. Twice our number." The words weighed heavy. The Ashthorn sisters were already wounded, weary from the fight with Pike. Against another clan, stronger, hungrier, they stood little chance. Silas ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. "So this is why you tested me," he muttered. "Not just for trust, for survival." Ilvara's gaze locked on him. "You swore the oath, small crow. None stand alone." Silas glanced at the women giants, yes, but not immortal. He remembered their camp, the tattered shelters, the empty racks, the hollow look in Mira's eyes, when she'd spoken of being forgotten. They were fighting not just for themselves, but for the last flicker of their people. He holstered his Colt, squaring his shoulders. "Then we don't wait for them to strike. We choose the ground, make it count." Brinja barked a laugh, though it was tinged with respect. "The little crow speaks like a war chief." Mira's lips curved faintly. "He thinks with cunning. That may save us yet." The sisters moved quickly, guided by Silas's plan. They shifted boulders to choke the narrow pass, dug shallow pits with their enormous hands, and piled timber to set aflame when the enemy advanced. Silas mapped escape routes, choke points, and places for Mira's stones to fall like thunder. As the morning sun climbed, the shadows of the Valoon grew sharper. Their leader, a brute with shoulders like a bull and tusk-like teeth, bellowed across the ridge. "Ashthorn, you are broken. Surrender your land or we take it with your skulls." Ilvara's reply shook the mountains. "We do not kneel." The Valoon roared in answer, their voices echoing like avalanches. Silas drew his Colt, his jaw set. "Looks like the oath's about to be tested." Mira placed a hand the size of a saddle on his shoulder. "Fight well, Silas Crowe. Tonight, either we rise together or we fall forever." The clash of clans was no longer rumor or threat. It was marching straight toward them. The ground shook as the Valoon clan descended, their war cries tearing through the peaks. Stone clubs and jagged spears gleamed in the hard morning light, carried by hands larger than oxen yokes. They moved like an avalanche, inevitable, crushing, merciless. Silas Crowe stood between the Ashthorn sisters, his Colt cocked, his heart steady despite the odds. He'd sworn the oath, and there was no turning back. "Hold the pass," he barked. "Make 'em choke on it." Ilvara limped to the choke point, planting herself like a fortress. Her club rested across her shoulders, her scarred face hard with grim resolve. Beside her, Brynja hefted her weapon, blood seeping through her bandage but her grin wide as a canyon. Above, Mira perched with a boulder in her arms, golden hair whipping in the wind, eyes locked on Silas. The first Valoon crashed into the barricade of rocks, roaring as he swung his club. Ilvara met the blow, the impact booming like thunder. The ground trembled under their clash. Brynja struck from the side, her swing flattening another brute, bones snapping like kindling. "Now, Mira!" Silas shouted. The boulder flew, crashing down on 3 enemies at once, scattering them into broken heaps. Dust filled the air, choking the cries of rage and pain. Silas fired, his Colt barking flame. One raider fell, another staggered. He reloaded quick, ducking behind stone as a spear smashed where he'd stood. The giant's battle raged above him, but he fought like a coyote among buffalo, darting, striking, vanishing. The Valoon leader roared from the rear, tusked jaw glistening with spit. "Break them! Burn them out!" He hurled a torch toward the timber barricade. Silas dove, catching it with his bare hands before it struck the kindling. The fire licked his skin, pain searing, but he smothered it against the dirt. "Not today!" he hissed. The battle turned savage. Brynja fell to one knee as a stone axe ripped across her shoulder. She rose again with a roar, driving her club through the raider's chest, but her strength wavered. Ilvara, bleeding heavily, still swung with terrible grace, though each strike slowed. Mira hurled her last stone, sending it crashing into the Valoon leader himself. He staggered, dazed, and Silas seized the moment. Colt raised. He sprinted through the chaos, boots slipping on blood and grit. He fired once, the bullet slamming into the brute's shoulder. The giant roared and swung wildly, his club smashing the earth where Silas had been. Ilvara and Brynja, battered but unbroken, surged together. Their clubs struck in unison, and the Valoon leader toppled, skull cracking against the rock. Silence followed, broken only by the labored breaths of the survivors. The remaining Valoon scattered, dragging their wounded, their war cries fading into the mountains. Silas lowered his colt, chest heaving. Mira descended from the ridge, her hand huge, trembling, reaching for him. "You stood when others would have fled," she whispered. "You are Ashthorn now." He looked at the three sisters, battered but alive, and for the first time in years, felt he belonged somewhere. The Ashthorn clan had not fallen. They had risen, and so had Silas Crowe. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.